you can hear and see me, if you could let me know. And Devin, you go ahead and start the recording.
We can hear you, and the
All
recording has
good.
started.
Excellent. All right, here we go. Updates and questions, and then the content today is going to be Dunkirk in a very interesting way, and then the Blitz. So let's do the updates first. Um, Remember, everything opens up on Monday. The work comes in if we're doing uh, the paper, whether it's a letter, whether it's a submarine, or whether it's the B-17. Those are coming up as well. So we want everything in by Saturday at 11:59. Then I grade it on Sunday, get it back to you in your grade box. So today and what you've been looking at in week 7, we're starting to move forward a little bit. The content's going to pick up, and the resources in the modules will as well. So week 7, what I call module 7, the London Blitz, 2 excellent readings, 2 great podcasts, one from the Royal Air Force Museum, and media clips on the Battle of Britain. Now, the reflection papers, make sure that you get back into the course material, and take a look at the guidelines for the paper. We've had a little drift when we've been crossing the channel with our plane a little bit. You've got to look more on the questions that I'm looking for in those reflection papers. So, we only have so many of them. So, we want to get back on course a little bit. So, take a look at each of the questions. Make sure you reflect not only on the readings, you can add in the podcast, and you can add in material from the media clips that I have in there. So far, they've been outstanding papers, and I want them to continue to improve. So you go through there and you kind of summarize. What are the 3 most important parts of that? That's critical. And then what did you learn that you didn't know before? There's a lot of other material I can put in there, but I've got to set it up so that, one, it's not too general, and number uh, two, that it's not so specific as you're wondering what in the world are we talking about here. So, because there's a lot of depth in studying this from many different perspectives. So, take a little look at the guidelines, and then when you're going through this, you've got to listen to those podcasts. Those are critical, and the readings. Um, you can then, you know, link back in, take a look at those media clips, and then go ahead and better to turn in that reflection paper at the end when they come in. An hour after I've opened the module, I'm wondering how somebody could do that so quickly. Um, the ones that come in on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays aren't as good as the ones that come in on Fridays and Saturdays. You just got to go through, read the material, reflect on it, think about it, take some notes, and get it ready to go. The link's open, so you can turn in the reflection paper 7 to take your time on it. Also, on a research paper, again, you're either doing a letter from a uh, World War II soldier. Uh, there's also the B-17s that are in there. There's the submarines. A lot of you have been asking questions about the subs. A lot of them were scrapped at the end of the war. A lot of the logbooks have never been looked at, let alone the crew. You could generally ask someone to name a submarine, and they say, well, maybe the Silver Sides or something. Yeah, don't know them. B-17s, a lot on the nose art, a lot of those were scrapped as well. So note that the research question, those questions, whether you're a letter, a B-17, or a submarine, can be found under the assignments in the main menu. That's where the questions are, depending on which one of the 3 that you selected. There's no hurry. We're doing them over a period of time, so you can do some research and looking for certain things. Also, the timetable, page the timetable, page 8. You take a look at that in the syllabus. It tells you what's due. And so we have question 3 due this Friday. So depending on which one of the 3 you have, you look up that question and you do a little research on it. If you're dealing with those submarines, you need to go to the National Archives site, because those other sites have bits and pieces of it, but not quite like what the National Archives. Those are copies, microfilm copies of the original reports, the patrol reports that came in. And so you're looking at one sub. We could also do comparisons of subs. I was hoping one of these days to do a submarine seminar just on that class of submarines, and then get the plotting board out, those nautical plotting maps of the war, so we could plot where those submarines are and how they moved and where the Japanese are, because you won't be able to find that anywhere. If you do, I'd sure like to see it. I'd like to see all the class of submarines that we're working with plotted on a board, and then where the Japanese subs were, where our subs went down, where their subs went down, and where the ships went down that those submarines sank, because we know from the reports how many torpedoes they had and how many ships they got. And so, we get a board, eight 4x8 sheet of plywood, and fix it all up with that map on it, and then get drawing some things out. We can get a I want that perspective on exactly how all that was happening. You read a little bit about it, but there's no one source you can go to. Even the naval sources uh, don't have quite those maps and the distances, and then how they were resupplied at sea, or where did they go for resupply, and what contacts did they have with the British and other allies shipping along the coast. See, those communications are still going to be out there. When those subs are talking to folks on some of those islands and getting intelligence. To me, that's really interesting. I want to know what kind of intelligence they're getting and where they're going once they're out there. So anyway, you can work on those. All right. So the link to submit the reflection papers, the research papers, they're there under the assignment tab in the main menu. So go ahead and take all those. That's everything that you need to get that moving along. All right. Keep reading. The Gilbert book is starting to come in, and Gilbert is superb. I put one of those C-SPAN tapes about Martin Gilbert, and you got to listen to him a little bit. And some of you responded about how he responded to some of those interviewees that were there. But he's the author of the book. He writes from an English perspective, but you need to get that. I was teaching the advanced course. I'd used a lot of the French material. Believe it or not, uh, it's uh, it's really objective. Because they were right there, and I've got a 3-volume set, and some of the comments and the stories in there, and the documents they use, just phenomenal to use those to get those books like that. So we have our perspective. The British has theirs. The French has theirs. The Russian, and coming along the line, the Germans have those. There needs to be more translation. I've gotten about as many letter books translated from uh, German sources, as they wrote letters during the war as well, and their experiences when they went back home. It's just another perspective on the war. All right, so I think that gets us to where we need to be. So remember, we need a little upgrade on those reflection papers like that. We don't want to run out of fuel before we get back to Britain. All right, I think that's about it. What I have on the my part of the updates. I'll turn it over to you for questions, and then I'm going to move on to Dunkirk and the Blitz. Questions, comments, anything I can help you with?
I just have a question, forgive me because I don't know, I can't recall the names or anything, but I think the prior to the German invasion going through the Ardennes forest,
Right.
um, there seemed to have been a big backlog of vehicles and whatnot that were like trapped, or they just weren't going anywhere. And yet the French reconnaissance planes were reporting it, but nobody would act on it. Is that accurate?
Yes, a lot of that. Yes, it is. But part of it is uh, the folks that were there at the Ardennes, where those tanks went through, were what they referred to. They weren't reserves; they were French cadets. And what was reported back from the reconnaissance was that these cadets were on maneuvers. There were some maneuvers like that. And the Germans had massed a lot of hardware along that line. But what they did, um, and one of the rules of war is you get your enemy to believe that you're coming at one place, and then you strike at another. It goes back to Sun Tzu. And so what the reports were is, yeah, the Germans are massed there, but that's where the ploy is. They're not coming there. They're not going to. It's not going to happen. They're coming as they did in World War One. And the Germans really got them to believe that they were up there in Belgium. And the British bought it hook, line, and sinker. So did the French. Everybody did. The locals. I mean, they just couldn't. No, it's not going to happen. It's, those are the miscalculations of war. So the Germans did. You can't hide all that, even in the trees. You think you can, but the French had intelligence reports that the Germans were massing there, and they just pass it off as saying it's impossible. They'll never get through there. That's where they want us to come. They want us. They did the same thing in World War One. Prince Rupert and the whole a bunch of those German forces were down there um, in along that line from the Ardennes south, and as the French attacked them in World War One, the Germans kept pulling back, and the French kept coming and coming, and the goal was to pull them away from Paris and say, "Hey, we've got the Germans on the run," and they pulled them so far out of position that the Germans stopped and stood, like an anchor brigade that I use in the Civil War class, and the French were fighting furiously. And then the Germans launched the attack, coming across the frontier, and that's where the British BEF started all up at Mons. And so it's the same strategy to get them to believe that you're coming from the Ardennes south, uh, but they knew that wasn't it. Even with the Maginot Line, they're not coming through there. And if they did, we can get there fast enough. So what happens is the same strategy they in World War One they applied in World War Two by getting them to, massing along that border from the Ardennes all the way south, and they were lined up ready to do it. Um, and this time they didn't. They came through where they didn't come through in World War One, so they just reversed it. But it was the same strategy, and so the armies were out of position. They were way up. The BEF in World War II were up there with the French, way up on that border toward Belgium, and they had the Belgian king and everybody else all in. The reports are coming that they're all going to be there. It's all going to happen, and then they mass there at the Ardennes, and the French sent more and more troops out there. So the center was wide open. So they punched through, and they swung to the left, to the right, and kind of wrapped everybody up. And then the main pincer, the main tank movement, took them all the way to Dunkirk and swinged a little bit to the right, trapped them at Dunkirk and Calais. It's Monstein that put the plan together, and Heinz Guderian, and Rommel were all there as well, and it fooled them. They just didn't believe they could get through there. So this report of maneuvers, the French had a lot of difficulty giving reports, getting them back and believing them. They said that's what they want us to believe. That's why they put cadets out there. And even though the weather wasn't that good, they could fly over, they could see them. But they thought, by the time they got through the trees and everything, we will have mobilized, and we can stop them. We'll close from the north, and we'll close from the south and protect the center, which they never did. That's the flaw, because the tanks did get through. And what happened is by the time they closed after the Germans got through. And then what happened is the Germans just basically wrapped them up on both ends, and that was it. They no chance to get out. There's a lot of strategy on that. I just kind of gave you a quick overview on it, but that's kind of what they were doing. All right. What else do you have? Questions, comments, anything else before I roll into Dunkirk? All right. Anything comes up, just interrupt me, Professor Argos. I have a question. I'll stop. Send me an email on it. So today, when you leave number one, you should have a good idea of what I think happened at Dunkirk, because we still don't have the final definitive answer on it. So, today will be the Dunkirk story. So when the next exam rolls around, you could use what I'm covering today as an exam question. What do we really think happened at Dunkirk? That's number one. The second one is, what was the impact of the Blitz on Britain and the entire war? And I'll try to get into that as well. All right, so let me roll through this. I did a little bit of it last time, but not enough, so I want to hit it today. What we have, you know where it's located, on the coast, 400,000 troops on the edge of France. Yeah, Germans moved so quickly, and the tanks came so quickly that uh, the British and the French had nothing else to do but withdraw or be encircled, and they basically withdrew, and they were up against the sea, and either they're all going to surrender or they're going to fight it out or they're going to get resupplied. What's going to happen? Sea is open. French rear guard. hmm So that's what the French are going to have to play. The French are going to have to play a strategic role here because they were supposed to be evacuated in one of the big French armies. It never happened. Churchill couldn't get them all out. There's a huge number of troops that are left that have to surrender, and it's real tragic. It's their Scottish groups, and I usually go into a lot of that. I won't have time today, but when they said they got them all, that didn't happen. No. So we know that the only way they're going to get off, and that Dunkirk is the wrong place to go because they don't have the necessary sea equipment to get them out. It's basically they're open and they can't get out because the larger ships can't get in, and there's no piers, ports, everything at Calais, and Calais is being held by the BEF until they're basically wiped out. Not good. Um, so what it's called is in the text materials they call it Operation Dynamo. Okay, yeah. And so what happens is the tanks are moving very quickly, and the German uh, troops are coming along behind them. And they've got air support, they've got communications, they've got all of that, and the RAF is there. The RAF is trying to do whatever it can, but eventually the RAF is going to be pulled off and sent back to Britain because it gets to the point where we can't lose the entire RAF trying to save the entire French army, and the British army will do what we can. And so it's a pretty fierce air war. That's taking place. And what happens is Germany is going to hit Dunkirk on all sides, is what's going to happen. The tanks tied up, and slowly there's going to be this movement. But what happens, there's a lull in this. All of a sudden, for some reason, the fighting's going to stop like that. And so the Germany, as they move forward with tanks, medium, lightweight, heavy tanks, supplies, troops, they've got it all. They're just cutting right through France, and in the process, they run into a series of French troops. And what happens here? This is one of the highest casualty rates for Germany in the war. Is here. And that's one factor is that when the reports go back to the German high command, it gets to the point where in all wars and all battles, there's about a level of casualties you can take before it comes a massive slaughter. And officers know that, or it's communicated. They don't talk much about it, but here's kind of the range of where we want to be. And in Germany's race to the sea here, their casualty rate was extremely high. And it goes back to the German high command is this is a way to fight a war. And so the idea that the French troops, the French officers and the French units didn't fight is a misnomer. They did. And the German dead know about it. hmm Uh, Part of the problem is that Germany through World War II, I don't think there's a number that you can trust as reporting the dead and wounded because they just didn't do it correctly. And so whatever numbers they gave us are generally wrong. Um, and even after the war, some of them admitted to it, but they didn't have a good number at all. So we can't really believe their numbers. And so what happens is Germany encircles and inches closer to Dunkirk. The British High Command make a decision they're going to evacuate, and they're going to do it. Um, they're going to take a period time to do this, and they view they could start in May and they could end it by they want a month to do that, but it isn't going to happen. They got to go very quickly, and so by June 4th and 5th, how we get to June 6th, not only World War I, but World War II. It just, boy, that month is just stands out as a lot of things happening. Uh, what we're going to do is there's just stragglers left. And we're going to get over 300,000 individuals off of that beach. You can see some of them there. And what's giving them the opportunity to get off the beach is that out there on the perimeter is the French army. And that army got evacuated. The British army does. This is the worst day, I think, in British history, is the evacuation of an army like that. I've read a lot about it, a lot of firsthand testimonies, and it runs the whole gamut. A good number wanted to stay and fight, even if they die fighting, they didn't want to turn tail like that and go home. And the British Army is really, in my perspective, and others will have, you have your own as well, was never the same. Um, when they brought them back, when they don't like to talk about it, they got them on trains and they sent them up to Scotland and the north. They had to pull down the shades because people, citizens, young and old, went to the train station and turned their back to the train cars with those people, with those soldiers in it. And these were older folks. And if you would have asked them, they said, I should have been there in their place because I'd be dead on the beach. For a British Army to do this was something that was very difficult for them. Even though they do much, they do fine in North Africa. They do stellar in other parts of it. There's something about what happens here with that many troops that happens. You can read a lot about it. The accounts of years later, people still got asked the question as to why did they come? Well, we had to save the army. They could have all been prisoners of war like that. Well, they had a lot of equipment. Can they be there's all kinds of issues, so we won't have time to go into those. But so what happens is they don't have the necessary equipment, and they've got some cruisers out there, but it's shallow water; they can't get in. So what they do is they call upon citizens. If you have what I call the little boats, and they call the little boats to, ply the channel and over there, and they'll swim out to you, or they'll get you in another boat and just get them back home, get them out. We got to do that. We got to get every possible, rowboat, little motorboat, launch, whatever you call it, to get them out. And what happens is the noise that's there. It's often called the Dunkirk throat. They couldn't talk anymore because of the noise. Germans came in, they had some back and forth with the RAF, but the Germans had some pretty good planes in this area as well. So there's a lot of bombing going on as well and strafing. But the question is, why was there this lull? Okay. Why was there a lull? And so what happened? The British Expeditionary Force fought for 3 weeks in retreat. And it's just a disaster. We saw the same thing in World War I at Mons, but it wasn't quite as bad here. But they're falling back. And one of the rare instances, they fought for 3 weeks to get back to Dunkirk. They were falling back without orders and few officers. Yeah. This is the British Expeditionary Force. This is the one that almost all of them were totally wiped out in World War I. In many cases, my view is that they may have determined the outcome of the war for what they did. The only few that came home were their officers. The rest are still there in France. A few bodies were brought home, but by the time they got to Ypres, you couldn't even find the bodies there. It was the finest army in the world in World War I, the British Expeditionary Force. And when they're all gone, over 80,000 of them, they created a new one, and that went over. And then they're still there in World War II. And so now, World War II, they're falling back without orders. They have very few officers, nothing. They're falling back because there's chaos. The Germans didn't come through. They're supposed to head down and cut off the tanks so that the tanks get, they're supposed to close to the center. The southern part along the marginal is supposed to close to the center and form a wall in the center, stop them from coming through. Both missed. They couldn't do it. And so now there's chaos, and there are some German troops up there. They made it look like it was going to happen, and all of a sudden now they're pushing from the north and they're coming from the center. So basically, they have no way to go. They can't go north, they can't go south, they can't go east. They have to go west to Dunkirk, and that's how they end up getting there. All right. Members of the Second BEF were created after Mons and the disasters at Gallipoli. Yeah. So I read the interviews after the war, after World War II, of what they experienced at Dunkirk, and this is what they said. Those who survived Gallipoli stated that Dunkirk was worse. So, the greatest evacuation and the greatest embarrassment of an army trapped in one small area was here, was at Dunkirk. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So von Rundstedt gets some orders. Yeah. Wow. High command orders. What do the orders say? Remember, these are Prussian. These have Prussian ancestry. German infantry and 5th Panzer Division ordered not to attack the British at Dunkirk. Now, if you want to know why they didn't attack, they weren't out of gas. Rommel knew that. He alluded to that. Why not? That's the question. Why? Okay. Well, we think in several of those German units coming through, and this is where there's all, during these courses, I run, hot and cold on the French. We all do, about certain actions, things like that. Why? German casualty rate was 70%. That's just astronomical. These are some German units, not the tank. A lot of infantry coming in. For every 10 men, 7 of them were shot, wounded, and incapable of fighting. That went back to Berlin. And what was happening in Berlin? This is what's happening in Berlin. Now, I don't have documents to prove this, but you'll find it if you read enough and you get into what's really going on. And that's what I want to know, because a lot of my ancestors and probably yours were in this war, and I wanted to know what happened at Dunkirk. It's like, well, they just ran out of gas. Well, that's a plausible thing to put into books because people believe it. That's not true. The German casualty rate was so bad that it went back to Berlin. And individuals in Berlin were saying, if this is the kind of war we're going to have, we can't have a war like this. So did they blame von Manstein? Manstein? You know who they were blaming. Now, also at foot is something that's really important. So we know that people are upset. And once it gets to some of the civilian population and the rest of the German high command, they're thinking, we'll all be dead here if we're going to go in to attack like this. And at all costs, we're going to, and they did what they were supposed to do, but they paid a price for it. So a casualty rate like that is totally unacceptable. Casualty rates are 20, you're looking 20, 25% a quarter. That's enough. Pershing was really chastised when we lost 25,000 men at the Meuse Argonne. When he told them straight up when he came back, he said, if he didn't do that, we'd have lost 100,000 like that. It's our greatest loss, twice what we had at Okinawa and Iwo Jima. One was 12,000 plus, the other was 6. Pershing had to do it. That's how you end a war. He didn't like it any better than anybody else. And so this casualty gets out. And so there's some things that are happening at Berlin. And I'll give you the story for what it's, and we don't know for sure because there hasn't been a lot about it, and the British don't talk about it. We don't talk about either. The story goes is that the United States was involved in this as Dunkirk was happening, and the German High Command was interested in not only the casualty rate, but once this all started, even before Dunkirk, we might have been involved. And this is probably the only instance, and the other ones would have never happened. The discussion was that we believe with the United States and Britain, and forget the smokescreen with Italy, Mussolini, and Halifax, that the United States, along with the British, were working with individuals in Berlin to remove the chancellor and president and form a new government. In order to do that, that's one of the reasons why we have a delay for a number of days that took place. Now, whether that's accurate or not, 2 days later, the order not to attack was reversed. That's premise number one. Number two is even a little more interesting. It could be the smokescreen, but I don't know. And someday maybe those records will come out. I don't know. Um, those records probably aren't set up to be, if they are available and we have anything 2025, maybe 2030, don't know. The other part of it is this, is that Hitler may have with Mussolini, with Halifax in Britain, uh, was in the process of negotiating with the British to, I'll let your army go. I want you out of the war. And for those negotiations to go on, we think if Churchill was behind it and he was a wizard at it, that maybe he bought the 2 days to do that. All right. Maybe he bought the 2 days by saying, we'll look into this, knowing full well that he wasn't going to do it. But if it bought 2 days, that's all the time that he possibly needed to get that army out of there and save it before the disaster comes. Because if the army is captured and they don't fight it out, what does Britain have? Because she put most of it over there. She's got the Navy. But when you get into the Blitz and you see German plans to invade Britain, I mean, that's a course into itself. Really, boy, they were really prepared. Yes. Boy, when you look at it, it's like, who worked on this plan? It's there. So the idea then is maybe this discussion is going back and forth. This is maybe where Mussolini and Halifax might have had that. I think that's plausible. It might be a smokescreen for what we were trying to do and what happened. This was the first, only, and major attempt to remove him, and it broke down. And why? I don't know. I don't know what happened. Maybe negotiators. I looked afterwards to see if any of those high command people were executed. Nope. So maybe it's a myth. Maybe it's a story. Maybe the one with Halifax is better, but they weren't out of gas, and Germany could have wrapped them all up. They were ordered to, what they called it, like stand down for 2 days. 2 days later, so they either bought 1 day or they bought 2 days, and that's what he needed to get as many of them out of there, not to attack. And then that was reversed. That order was reversed, and then the Germans put it on there. But in the interim, lots of things happened. And so there's a few other parts to it that are even more, when you think about them, it's like, whoa, is that what we were doing? Like that. Seeing if they would basically, the military would get rid of him, sue for the peace, back out of France, and let's see what we can do for repair in Poland. I thought when Gorbachev fell from office, or we got in there, that they'd release Russian records on and get their take on it, but that never happened. And if anybody would know, the Soviets, they had infiltrators all over. They would have known like that. I want to know what they're thinking at the time of Dunkirk. What are those Russians thinking about what's going on? What moves are they making? All right. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And when I'm back in class, I really spend a lot more time on it. But at least it gives you an idea as to what happened. The significance: Britain needed only 2 days to effect the evacuation. The idea could have been, all right, this is a possibility. Let's talk about it for 2 days, and then give me 2 days to do it and see, because the goal is they want to go east. They want to hit the Soviet Union. In order to do that, if they can get Britain out of the war, then Britain will not serve as a base, and we would have been in a lot of difficulty if everything came to pass the way it did, because we wouldn't have a base to land to move our invasions forward like that. And Churchill knew that. And so it's back and forth. And you see that facts is a key part. You got to read his diaries and what he writes about it. He's really siding with Mussolini uh, and encouraging, let's take it, let's do this, let's do that. I mean, he's in that Chamberlain vintage, and Churchill won't buy that. And so significance is Britain needed only 2 days to effect the evacuation, and she bought it. And then after 2 days, somewhere there was some arrangement set up that we weren't going to do this for 2 days. It could have been our efforts to create a new government with some people in that German high command, and it may have been because the casualty rate was so high. There were discussions, and the sidetrack to that is there were discussions where the Germans were thinking, unbeknownst to this group that was trying to create a new government, that they were going to remove him because of this casualty rate. And they don't talk about it. You won't find it. It took me a long time to find that casualty rate. Go ahead, Robert.
So I just want to kind of go back a little bit. So basically, the thought is that Churchill, because I knew the Halifax was trying to get, he wanted nothing but peace. He didn't want anything to do with the war. And Chamberlain didn't want to have anything to do with the war, right? So they were trying to negotiate this peace treaty with Mussolini, but you're saying that possibly Winston Churchill was using this as a ploy to delay. Okay, I just want to make sure I understood what you said correctly.
A lot of high level politics going on. They're sweating it. He got him out. That's what he did. And that was it. In a sense, it might have, I mean, they changed the outcome of the war. Here, you see, that's what we need to find out, is what was going on with that. I may have bits and pieces of it, maybe I don't. So what we have are three major outcomes. Okay, what are they? The first one is save Churchill's government. Okay. So after the 2 days, whatever it is, there's some communication that goes back that said, no, we're not going to do what Halifax and Mussolini and everybody's trying to do. There isn't going to be any of that. We're not going to have a peace treaty. We're not going to get out of the war. We're not going to promise not to have anybody land on our coast area. We're going to just, if you want it, you'll have to come. We're going to, we got the army out, and either they reneged on what they were thinking about doing, or maybe Churchill worded it in a way that he didn't renege on anything. But for 2 days, there's discussions going on somewhere about something, and there could be dual discussions going on. All right, it prevented Britain from negotiating a truce with Germany. That's part of it. The truce could have been, leave the army there. Okay, don't attack, just leave the army there. We'll talk about it, and we'll just kind of leave them here. You can't use them anywhere else. We won't do anything to them, and we'll set up camps and everything, and then we're heading east to take on the Russians. Right? So he got him out in 2 days, prevent Britain from withdrawing from the war. How close was she from withdrawing from the war? Now, this is a pretty desperate time. France has fallen. They're out. What's going to happen? Who's going to stop them? What are the Russians doing? They're sitting, waiting, watching, looking, right? BEF viewed faith in the Maginot Line, which was a mistake. Not good. You don't have any faith in that line. No. French said it would never fail. You see, they're not realists. You look at everything, you put this up and say, this is a great defense like that. My response is, it's going to fail. Well, it can't, because we got this and this and this. You got to have other alternatives. You just can't rest everything. And they did. And once the Germans figured it out, how to, nibble at the end and go right through it. And then they countermanned everything with explosives and took it over. And that was the end of it. Hardly did anything. Simple fact, the Germans broke through at the Ardennes, and France was outmaneuvered. And they were guarded by, the best thing is inexperienced territorials along with cadets. Okay, that's what it is. That's who's up there. And so obviously they had planned for the major German attack to roll through Belgium like it did before. Well, Manstein came up with the plan and sold them on it, which they thought was ridiculous. He had very little support on it, but it worked. You see, that's what happens. So, who takes credit for that, of course. And so Now what happens is they become more and more risk takers with these different plans, without thinking them through. So the real risk taker on this one, the next one you might want to be ultra conservative to keep your opponent off balance. And so they get through at the Ardennes. We know that it's a race to Abbeville and the coast. And when they do that, the BEF took heavy casualties. So if the BEF took heavy casualties, that means the Germans took heavy casualties. And so there's quite a bit of real fighting that goes on here, and it just glosses over. Well, France fell and all of that. Well, how did those Germans repatriate all of the dead? What happened to them? What about all the wounded, like this? Right. What's going on? May 24th, the Germans attack north of Lille. So they're moving. They've been over this territory before. They were there. Okay. May 26th, King Leopold responds to this because, we're, same kind of thing we saw in World War One, right? Sure. The king doesn't like all this. 600,000 Belgian citizens on the road and in ports leaving. Same replay of World War One, and that's exactly what the Germans wanted. Let them plug up all the roads. So the BEF were fleeing along with the civilians. It's a total rout. It's a mess. Same thing. Belgians can't wait to get out. The ports are plugged up. The British ships can't get in. 600,000. That's the number we have. It is probably more. Uh, to get Belgians' participation in the war, to study that, you wonder, is like, hey, couldn't they just stay home? The Germans aren't going to take them with them. They're not interested in civilians at this point. They want Paris. That's where they're going. And so on May 27th, King Leopold surrendered. So that important. Well, he did something that I didn't think was a good idea. I'm somewhat critical of the king here. Yeah. He never contacted any of the allies to tell him he was surrendering. Yeah. All those years, Britain taking the security and protection of Belgium, coming there twice in 2 wars, sacrificing thousands of men. And he didn't even have a time to send a telegram or a note saying, by the way, I'm going to surrender. And so you better leave or do whatever you can do. No, didn't do it. May 28th, a pocket is created at Dunkirk, less than 60 square miles. Okay, so here it comes. Day before, the Germans hit with bombers. So they had bomber superiority. RAF can't shoot them down. So they could literally bomb the daylights of all those troops heading back there. That's why they didn't do that. So when the troops get there, the French and British troops, everybody's heading, pulling back, heading to the coast, looking for evacuation. They all want to go to Calais, but they're told you can't get to Calais because there's nothing left of Calais at this point. So what happened? Poor communications on the beaches. They're out of control. Poor communications. They're all out of sequence. Where are the officers? Where's the plan? It's a rout. French army is holding at the periphery. They did a good job at that. Yep. They really held at the periphery. Allow the British to leave like that. And the French really fought there at the periphery. The Germans noted it. Afterwards, then what they're going to do is surrender, and the British will leave the wounded and those, and then the Germans will, as the ships are gone, the boats are gone. All right. So May 30th, 120,000 British are evacuated. Yeah. They weren't even sure that they could get all of them out. You see, they really weren't sure that they could get all of them to come out. So this is the start of it, and eventually there'll be over 300,000 of them that'll be evacuated from Dunkirk in what I call the little boats that'll do that. And the French will stay. Some of them will surrender. The British spike some of the big guns. I've got a lot of pictures of that. Most of the vehicles, they'll take all the vehicles the British left behind and all the equipment, and the Germans won't take care of them. But Mussolini sends out these Italian units, and all this equipment's going to end up heading back to Germany, and it'll be on rail cars heading to the Eastern Front with Italian drivers. So they all knew that that was going to happen. They wanted all those supplies. Maybe that was part of the negotiation. Like that, they could have destroyed everything, but they, for some reason, they didn't. And the question is, why wouldn't you? I mean, you could get some pistols and rifles there. I mean, you could tear up those engines, set them on fire, pour things in the gas tanks, do whatever you can to make sure nobody used anything. Rip up all the tires, and they did some of that. But they left their rifles, a lot of rifles. I'm wondering, why would they leave all this equipment? Is that part of the arrangement that you could leave if we can get all this equipment? I don't know. If you're an army, would you want to leave all your fighting equipment? Well, the boats are small and things like that. Okay. How much equipment did they leave? And I mean, I got a whole listing of it. And when you look at it, it's like, wow, got 300,000 plus troops there. Yeah. Very interesting. All right. That's about all I can do on Dunkirk. I want to shift over and I want to get into the Blitz for us today. There's a lot more we could do on Dunkirk, but you can also look at it. And you have any questions, be happy to. What happens after the evacuation of Dunkirk? And we know that there were a lot of units left, and there's tremendous stories about those units. And so now we're into what we call the Battle of Britain. And the Battle of Britain starts early, even before all these activities at Dunkirk. We see Britain sending planes over into Britain in May and in June, just kind of casing things out. And then what happens is, we get through May and June, July 10th, 1940, Germany attacked Britain with 70 aircraft. This isn't a recon operation. This is an attack. Yep. 2 months earlier, the British Spitfire fighting the Luftwaffe in the Channel. That's right. That's where they were. And what they were trying to do is make sure that the Luftwaffe didn't get any further into Britain, and they were trying to save as many as the BEF as they could, save as many of the French forces as they could. Right? That's their goal. They're hitting on this. In the summer of 1940, the world changed, because what's going to happen is, as this struggle goes on here, as the invasion plan. This is what they're going to do. Germany now plans, the army's gone, the British army's gone. They're going to different camps to get themselves set up again so that they can become a fighting force. So now what happens is Britain's very survival is at stake. And now Germany's got some air superiority in France. The BEF's back. The RAF is still there. And now what's going to happen? The Germans are coming. Okay. Now, notice the chronology, says, oh, I have to learn dates and everything. Oh boy, I like looking at these dates. I don't necessarily memorize all of them, but we kind of generally know. May 10th, 1940, the German leadership made a strategic decision. Oh, I like strategic decisions. The battle which begins today will decide the fate of the German nation for the next 1,000 years. Now do your duty. Wow. Okay, so now we see this battle here. Right. You see what happens, France is in June of 1940. France, we already did that. We did the final fall of France as the Germans so-called mopped up the southern part of France, where they had a lot of French fascists there as well and socialists. Right. The battle which begins today. Okay. Look back to a Sunday morning, September 3rd, 1939. Right. To Ribbentrop. Now remember, Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. Wow. So this is the communication to Ribbentrop. And you know who it's from. It's from the chancellor, the president. Hitler writes to Ribbentrop a couple of words. What now? Okay. So he didn't know. Remember, they wanted to go east, but now they're going to go west. Now they're going to go east. What's going on? All right. And so what happens is living space in the east. That's what he told them. Okay. No, they're already there. So the idea is then why all of a sudden did we shift into France in 1940 when there's living space in the east? Okay. Oh, now we have to deal with the British. I see. So you can see this inconsistency when Ribbentrop, who is right at the top of all the foreign policy, he's the negotiator for a lot of this. Um, and now all of a sudden, living space in the east. We're already into Poland. Well, the next step would be the Soviet Union. What would the French and the British have done if Germany didn't do anything in France? Subdue them. Okay. Okay. And to the east. So Ribbentrop gives an idea about living space like that, and then the responses go back and forth, and then the decision is, this is early in it's 1939, it's September. This is before the Russians even show up in Poland, and the idea is, the British subdue them, and then to the east. Okay, so we've already attacked in the east, we're already there, and then Ribbentrop's idea is, let's what now? And then there's this communication back and forth, so he doesn't really know. And then the communication back is he wants to see what Ribbentrop thinks, and Ribbentrop's smart because he said, well, we need living space in the east. Okay, got that, but let's do this first, and then we'll head to the east. So strategic miscalculations is what takes place. If you got a foreign minister, he would have said, look, we can't be going, if we're going one way, let's go, we're going to end up with is a two-front war, and we'll be in the same spot we were from 1914 to 1918, and we were lucky to get out of that with an armistice, and we're going to do that again. Right. Now, German high command as early as 1937, and I didn't go over that at this time because it's all related to Britain. In 1937, they're already saying that Britain is the number one enemy. All right, why are we attacking Poland? Why are we attacking France? And then, we've got the Dunkirk, and then we got the Battle of Britain, and then we're going to attack the Russians. All right. So as early as, that 1937 time period, right? And in 1937, Japan is already into China, and the Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek are fighting the Japanese. They're going to fight them for 7 years. So this has already taken place. The Japanese invasions parallel September, 10 days after September 1st, 1939, the Japanese hit the second major Chinese city. So the Japanese and Germans are already communicating. So all this is coming into the German high command. They're pretty well organized with what's going on in different places. So there's already some work there. Russia's got a big part of this because she wants these non-aggression pact because she doesn't want a two-front war. Okay, 10 days to move through the Ardennes, and they did it in less than that. Fast, highly mobile force. So they're pushing that mobility idea to go through. Oftentimes the troops can't catch up because they don't have all the mechanized equipment that all the movies make them out to be. They still have a lot of horses. I gave you that last time. Horses, mules, donkeys, carts, carrying it on your back. You see more German soldiers packing, like mortars and machine guns and all of that on their back because they don't have the mechanized equipment to do it. They have some, but not enough to sustain them in the field. You got to have supply lines when you're there. So maybe on the way to Dunkirk, they just got a little rambunctious and got there very quickly and kind of surprised themselves. And so the high command in Berlin's got to figure out is like, well, we got to see if we can get a peace treaty out of them now. So the Germans may have, in a sense, cut off what they really wanted to get Britain out of the war by just, and they couldn't stop them. Rommel even alluded to that as like, these folks are like maniacs, and and he used the German word for it. You couldn't stop them. They were that intense to get to the coast, and that's why their casualty rates, I think, were so high. So there's a lot going on here. Manstein and Guderian, Hans Guderian, those are the two. RAF fewer than 500 planes when the war broke out. Gee, fewer than 500. Dunkirk, Germany lost 132 planes over Dunkirk. Okay, so we know they were there, and they were. I mean, this is the the pinnacle of the Luftwaffe at this time. They're pretty strong. Britain lost 189. All right. So the key is 132 planes. We can assume the pilots went down with them. At least half of them or more died. So they're losing key quality pilots in the RAF, 189, right? They tried to save France. They couldn't do it. They put in everything absolutely that they could, but they never could. Couldn't do it. Or they would have been wiped. The RAF wouldn't have been able to survive, and they barely made it. So now the invasion of Britain. How are the Germans going to do it? 155 transport ships for troops. Okay, 155 of them. They're going to put over 3,000 barges. 3,000 barges with all kinds of equipment, supplies, you name it. It's all set up, ready to go. This wasn't just make-believe. They had it. 90,000 troops on the first wave. Whew. Second wave, 26,000 troops. Okay, there's 100,000 plus. So this invasion is there. The order of August 1st, 1940 to the Luftwaffe: destroy the British forces in the shortest time possible. That's the order that's given to them. Okay, so look where we've come from Dunkirk, May, June, fall of France, June, July, August. Yeah, there's time in there for the British to get reorganized. And we're still in 1940, August, right? London was bombed every day and night from September 1940 through May 1941. Never seen anything like it. September 1940 through May 41. 1/3 of London's destroyed. Right? 1/3 of London. It gets the name the Blitz. Well, they were blitzed in World War I, too, going over there with dirigible, all kinds of balloons and things, scaring them all. Right. Okay. First night of the Blitz, 2,000 are killed. So what are we doing? Carpet bombing. Britain do the same. We won't do it in Europe. No, we have strategic precision bombing. Sometimes they go off course, but we don't go and bomb civilian homes and hospitals. Much different in the Pacific. Okay, we carpet bombed 3 times, and those orders came from Roosevelt. I can give you all that down the road. In 24 nights, Germany dropped 5,300 tons of high explosives. So if they have all these high explosives, then there must have been a plan to use these high explosives. And where are they going to use them? Well, the only plausible places would be either on Britain or in Russia. And they're not until they turn and head east and go to Russia, because why would they bomb France? They're not going to bomb themselves. So, it's like 5,300 tons in 24 nights. Obviously, they got some big production. These things just don't appear. So they got a stockpile of these. These are incendiary, high explosives. 32,000 civilians killed, 87,000 badly wounded. 1 out of 10 bombs failed. Oh, so you give them 90%. It's not a bad number, but still, you don't want any. But it'll ramp up. The British will have a much higher number of explosives that don't work. You always have that. There's other reasons for it. It's not necessarily production. It's shipping, it's weather, the equipment that's supposed to fire it. There's all kinds of things. 2 million homes are destroyed. And so as it continues, it goes from 1/3 to 60% in London, right? 2 million homes destroyed, right? The 60% of that number is in London. So they're concentrating on London, right? That's the capital. They want to bring it down. All right. In 1941, German Air Force is sent to the east for the Russian invasion. So they couldn't knock them out, and the Russian invasion can't wait. So they pull off the Luftwaffe, heads east, gives a breather to Britain. They're not going to be bombed like that. Then we're going to end up into a stalemate of a war that'll take place. Britain will be there, regrouping, ready to do some other things, not until we get into the war. Britain had radar, okay, and that was important. They could detect enemy planes 60 miles away. So when they detected them, they could move their planes, the RAF, to other fields, so then hide them. All right, so that's important. Okay, Also decoded German bomber communications. Oh boy, now that's a good one. Yeah. So we knew what they were doing on that end of it as well. All right, just a few more, and then we'll close for today. And they failed to take out the British radar stations or to jam them. So the planes that did come over from French fields were detected well in advance. The British fighters, the RAF, were up there waiting for them, had their offensive positions in place, and the Germans had a tough go of it coming in. So they had to switch off to nighttime bombing. They had to switch off to other locations because they just couldn't keep facing the RAF because they had the radar, and the Germans failed to do it. By the time they figured it out, and I'm not sure why they were so tardy on it, is that by that time it didn't matter because the RAF had really put them in a position where they weren't going to lose that many more planes over this. So um, the Germans then began to jam all of the stations so that the British couldn't detect where they were. And so that's the command that comes from the high command: get the RAF away, get them out there. He wanted them destroyed. Okay. July 10th to August 10th, Germany lost 286 planes and Britain 150. Okay. It's called the Day of the Eagle, Deaglatag, the Day of the Eagle. Massive airstrikes, August 15th, 1940, right? 18 days, Germany flew 7,500 sorties. Yeah, what a number. On August 31st alone, 790. This is the German Eagle, the day of the German Eagle. 500 German planes lost. The end of August, Germans jamming the British radio links late. Something's wrong on that. Air Marshal Johnson said another 2 weeks and the RAF would have been finished. And he would have known. Yep. Yep. Air Marshal Johnson, another 2 weeks and the RAF would have been finished. And Germany pulled off, went to other areas in Britain, and everything begins to change. Okay, we're over by a couple of minutes. I apologize for that. So I gave you a little insight into what's going on today. What was going on in the war at this time with Britain. So next week, then, we're going to continue. What I'll do is invasion of Russia and Japanese expansion in Pearl Harbor coming up for week 8. So now that Germany turns to Russia, we'll see what happens there. Then I'll switch to Japan and the Pacific and do Pearl Harbor. Okay, questions, comments, anything I can help you with?
Yeah, I have a question. So if I can just kind of summarize a little bit, when Germany basically, after France, they really didn't want to fight Britain. They just wanted to hold them off. And was the idea is that they would just simply take over Russia and then maybe go back?
Get Britain out of the war so that she wouldn't serve as the base, because they're always keeping an eye on us and Canada and other imperial domains that may help Britain. So the idea is just isolate her, use a German submarines to make sure she's not resupplied, and just say, look, you're out of the wars, isolate them. That's it. And then turn to the east and take the whole concentration there, using France and the Duchy of Warsaw and Italy and the Greater Reich to supply the war materials that she needed to get into Russia. That was the goal. And in a sense, they did isolate Britain, but they didn't get any deal out of it that we wouldn't let anybody else use Britain as a base. And we did before the invasion. We needed that. We needed the help even when we landed in North Africa. So, the goal was just to isolate them, even though they had this plan for invasion. Still question whether they really wanted to do that, even though they had a lot of the supplies massed to do that. They were all produced and they had train loads of things, as much like Napoleon. It's the same Napoleonic strategy. Get them to believe you're going to invade there, and then you strike to the east with the Russians. So I think that was the strategy, but others have different views, Robert. Um, See, that's why in a lot of this we don't know. This is still recent history for us until a lot of things start to come out as to what was going on. And Britain's real quiet about it. So are the Russians. As to really what was going on, how close were we with them getting out of the war, and that would have really impacted us if the Japanese would have continued with their strike plan. Don't know, but that's the best I can give you on that. These are
Thank
really
you.
tough. Yeah, you're welcome. These are tough questions, but these are the questions we need to talk about because it impacts us in the world today as to what was really going on at that time. Because we're going to get there, and when we do, we're going to fight both in the Pacific and we're going to fight in Europe, and we're going to really, we're going to put a lot into Europe. And then we get lulled a little bit, and then we get hit pretty hard at the Battle of the Bulge, which we come back. We lost more at the Battle of the Bulge than we did at D-Day. So I'll try to put it in perspective for you a little bit, but it's powerful history. Okay, anything else? Other questions, comments?
It's scary to think that if Britain didn't hold, where we would be today.
Yeah, it might have been close there. I don't know, but we have to think about that because there's clues as to what's going on. Why would you stop an army that's got tanks and fuel and everything else, and you've trapped an army of 300,000? They did something like, wow, okay, what do we do now? Well, and they stopped for 2 days. There's got to be some negotiation. And the Germans talk a lot of that. Some of the German soldiers wrote a little bit about it. They got tired. They weren't happy. They wanted to capture the entire army. That's what they wanted to do. They wrote about it. But then a lot of those are going to be killed later in the war, and not a whole lot of that survives because those tank units are going to be involved in a lot of other campaigns, and Rommel's going to end up in North Africa with the Africa Corps, which is another group, and they'll end up rendering supplies and materials just like the British did. The whole Africa Corps has to surrender. At the end, they were throwing rocks. Nothing left. No supplies. All right. That's all we'll do for today then. Thank you very much.